over in Maui. But she's actually adopted a couple kids, and then as part of the schools over there, she is farming, teaching organic farming to these young underprivileged kids in this impoverished country, which was part of her master's degree at Evergreen College. So, having been out of touch with her for the last 6 to 20 years, I should say, because she was over here briefly for about a day or so, about 6 or 7 years ago, but we never really connected that closely to find out what the bigger picture was, and that's where she's at right now. So interesting twist to that, that she is doing that over, and we were just talking about kind of like third world countries, almost in a sense, because of I don't know if you'd even call it deregulation. It's just that they haven't regulated things. They seem to be a little bit above the curve from where.
Oh we are. Yeah, it's about intact cultures and non-intact cultures, and when we go into a third world country, part of that country has been displaced, colonized, and out there. But as you get out into the country where these people haven't been affected, it's a little bit more of an intact culture. And I had the same experience in Ecuador. There's definitely, you can see the colonial influences and stuff. But when you get out into where guys are farming and doing stuff, I don't really seem any different than me going out and farming and doing stuff.
And I see they look really sad.
Yeah, they look. The picture you've got here is just you could be kids in Kona eating a sandwich.
Genuinely very happy.
Yeah, and healthy too.
Yeah.
And so the reality is this Earth is an incredible conscious being, and we have to treat it that way. And when we start looking at technology trying to fix problems, okay, which is the issue that we talk about technology. Oh yeah, we can't grow food there anymore. We're not getting the production we need. So they come up with all these different things to fix that problem. Yeah. Let's do something that'll lead us to really where I wanted to go. I don't know if we'll get to it in the next half hour, but let's just give a little history of agriculture, of how technology has taken it over. We all know about hybrids, and a lot of the biotech guys and the genetically modified guys are saying that genetic modification is just kind of a high-tech hybridization, right? Obviously very, very different. Hybrids are where you take one corn from Mexico and one corn from Iowa, and you mix them together, and you try to get a variety that'll have certain aspects that maybe it'll grow better in a certain situation. It's usually growing the same species, just a slight variation of that species, mixing them together, and you create a hybrid. Why did hybridization all of a sudden really start coming on in the 20s and 30s? Okay, the 20s and 30s, and I always look at things about 15-year cycles as generational things. The 20s and 30s are one generation past when the introduction of synthetic fertilizers, which was there was a Huber-Busch process, I don't quite know if I'm pronouncing it right, which was able to take energy, heat, and pressure, and take the nitrogen that was in the air and combine it with water and carbon dioxide and whatever's in the atmosphere and create urea or ammonium nitrate or whatever it is, basically called fixing nitrogen. And that was originally created to create armaments, because the ammonia and nitrates and stuff like that is what they can make bombs out of. But it was also what we need for fertilizer. Wow. Okay, so as the slowly started introducing, after World War I, it slowly started being introduced into agriculture. Actually created the Dust Bowl problem that we had and stuff like that. And then we started seeing problems. Plants weren't growing quite as well. And people were wondering, what can we do? What can we do? And different scientists realized that some of their heirloom plants grew better and some didn't grow better. And so they started getting into some breeding programs. They had a fairly good understanding of breeding, and they were breeding cows and horses and plants for years. I mean, the sweet orange we eat now came from a kind of a sour mandarin. I mean, we've been evolving and mixing plants together and doing that for years. It got a little more high-tech, a little more scientific, and we started calling it hybridization. And what was the problem? Now, I look at it as a problem of mineralization, that these chemical fertilizers were depleting minerals at a rate that weren't able to be replenished by natural forces. And this goes all the way back to a guy named Justus von Liebig, who in the 1800s came up with basically the plant science that we are living with today. Mm-hmm. It's called the NPK concept. And it's nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus are the three major nutrients that plants need to grow. And anyone that grows anything knows you add a little bit of nitrogen to your mix, things are going to grow faster. You add a little bit of phosphorus, things are going to flower faster. You add a little bit of potassium, you're going to get a little bit bigger fruits. So NPK corresponds generally, it's not this simple, but I'm going to make it simple right now, that NPK, N would be for leafy stuff and greens, P would be for flowering, phosphorus, and K, it's for potassium. I don't know, they call it K. Potash. Mm-hmm. And that would be for the fruiting. So it's NPK. So that's the life cycle. So at the beginning you give a high nitrogen fertilizer, in the middle you give a high phosphorus fertilizer, and at the end you want to give a higher potassium fertilizer. Okay, so that wasn't working. But we go back and look at what Justus von Liebig was all about. We understand that he also said that it needs other things also. Mm-hmm. But that the NPK, given in an acid form, would leach from the parent rock the other minerals mm-hmm. that the plants needed. Now, as they developed these NPKs, the guys that were doing it said, I don't want to talk about this rock thing. Let's just keep it NPK and let's make it acid fertilizers, and we've got a lot of power. Because if they started talking about all these other things, it became a little bit more complicated and they really couldn't sell it to the farmer. Justus von Liebig literally protested and said, you are messing with my theory. He was destroyed. And I think he ended his life in an insane asylum.
Wow. Because
the power elite people, the 1%, the technologists said, you're kind of crazy. We don't see calcium and magnesium and we don't zinc and all these other trace elements meaning anything. It's NPK does it. And they were in Europe, highly mineralized, glacial soils, didn't really have a problem at that point. Mm-hmm. But as we evolved, as it went on, these minerals, these 10 parts per million minerals, the zinc, the magnesium, the trace elements, were being depleted to the point where they were unavailable to the plant. And so when a plant is growing, it's thinking, on one level, spiritually, it's thinking, I want to feed these people. On another level, it's thinking, I need to make some really good, viable seed. Okay? And now we get back to the phytonutrient thing we were talking about at the beginning of the show. The phytonutrients are there, the flavors and the colors are there for the plant to protect it from solar radiation, insects, and diseases so it can produce a seed, a viable seed. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when you're growing a crop with not enough minerals, a lot of the plants will just fall on the sword, will die, so that a few of the plants will get enough minerals to produce the phytonutrients to create the seed. So production goes down. So now you're not getting your 30, 40, 50 bushels, maybe you're getting 20 or 30 bushels. And guys are going, why? What are we doing? What are we doing wrong? Oh my God, we got to figure this out. Nobody was talking about mineralization. They talked about putting more nitrogen, nitrogen, more and that worked, and it kept depleting and depleting. And in a place like Hawaii, 50 to 70% of all that nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus fertilizer washes into the ocean and destroys the nearshore environment. And this is one of the reasons why the pollution on the coastlines of California is so bad and all these other things is because of these problems. So they started hybridizing. Now what they did is they created plants that lost the will to make a viable seed. Mm-hmm. So they didn't need these trace elements anymore to create the tastes and the colors. Okay. They just bushels. They didn't create the proteins, the protein carbohydrate balances, because all they were doing was creating it itself. They lost that spiritual connection. So you've got the bushels. Maybe the protein carbohydrate thing was out of whack. maybe it got maybe more fungus or something like that. Aflatoxin is a big problem because of the protein carbohydrate relationship. I think it causes a lot of the health problems we have today in peanuts and in wheat and corn. A lot of that is affected by aflatoxin, which is a cancer causer because of the protein content. And if you look at the protein content of GMO wheat or GMO corn, it's half probably of the protein content of conventional corn, the spelts, corn, and the ones that hadn't been hybridized. Mm-hmm. The unhybridized wheat produced way higher protein, was way more nutritious, was hugely highly mineralized. It was more of a food. The USDA was bragging back in the 60s that the conventional wheats they had didn't work very well in mechanized bakeries that didn't set up correctly, quickly enough. So they were literally hybridizing to change the gluten. Mm-hmm. So literally chemical composition of the gluten so that it would set up better in the bakeries, in the commercial bakeries, the Wonder Bread bakeries, which is, I think, we have a gluten intolerance. It isn't gluten, it's these other proteins that have now been created in the hybridized grains that they've created, okay? And then you have this whole other issue of demineralization, hybridization, and one of the aspects of hybridized, anything that's hybridized, is it doesn't grow viable seed. Most of the seed isn't viable.
It doesn't produce. That's part of its design. Is it doesn't.
It doesn't produce a viable seed. I mean, that wheat grain does not grow into a nice wheat. You have to buy the same wheat or a different wheat. You can't replant. It's not open pollinated.
Right.
But farmers want that open pollinated wheat. They want that open pollinated this or that, or beans or lettuce or whatever it is. And then we see the hybridized tomatoes. They're not as good as the heirlooms. Mm-hmm. The heirloom lettuce it tastes great. I mean, you eat hybridized lettuce that people buy in the store, the lack of minerals is unbelievable. The silica content in these store-bought foods is very low, and silica is so important to the human body, especially for skin. Why do people have so many skin diseases? Because the silica content of the food is so low right now. People aren't getting these minerals that actually are there for us. The silica was like the bones of the plant. Mm-hmm. And so these are things that were never recognized. And then they started recognizing, we need calcium, we need to balance the pH, and then a guy named William Albrecht came along back in the 30s and 40s, and he's really the godfather of organic farming. And he was a professor out of Missouri who led the USDA soil stuff to get us out of the Dust Bowl. He recognized the importance of trace elements, of balancing calcium, magnesium, potassium, base saturation, stuff like that. As this show evolves, we're going to get more into the chemistry and the real nuts and bolts of growing stuff. And if people call, I'd be happy to go there at any moment. Yeah. But right now, we're just going to say that in the 30s and 40s, they started recognizing calcium and magnesium and other trace elements. And just in the last few years, they started recognizing copper and zinc and other cations that were important for growing. But as this hybridization thing kicked in, we started getting more bushels, and we started getting more of this stuff. The nutrition went down. Obviously, the health of the country went down. But we needed these bushels at a cheaper price because as the Federal Reserve was creating more and more money, we couldn't allow the price of food to move up in that price range. We had to keep the price of food low so people didn't notice the inflation of the money supply. And by keeping the food prices low, we didn't allow more money going into the economy, and therefore needed more loans and stuff like that so the Federal Reserve would go. So we needed this cheap hybridized type food. It also created more medical problems, which created the whole, basically the HMO concept now, which is a third of 40% of our economy now is health-related.
And when you put it in that context, the fact that the U.S. government subsidizes programs like, beef and McDonald's